This is G. Monterastelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 311, originally aired April 18th, 2018. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are or whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending a little time with me today. Today is a conversation about resource and energy management inside of our relationships and how we can use tapping to make sure that we stay safe and healthy. Now, the audio that you are about to hear is actually the bulk of a presentation that I gave at this year's Spring Energy event, which happens every single year just outside of New York City. If you are interested in going to an amazing 2-day training event where you have the opportunity to really transform the tool set that you have to improve it and to do some personal work, I would encourage you to go to springenergyevent.com, sign up on the mailing list. Even though the event is a year away, if you sign up now, you're going to be in a circumstance where you get a chance to hear a lot of the recordings from previous years, so you can enjoy some of that content. And you'll be the first to know about the information as we get ready for doing it again next year. It is one of my favorite weekends of the year. My presentation this year, like I said at the top of the show, was about resource and energy management inside of our relationships. Relationships don't exist in a vacuum. They are a two-way thing that is a living organism that's constantly changing. And they give us a great deal of joy and they nourish our lives. And at the exact same time, they can be hard, particularly when they're changing, particularly when we are changing and evolving through time. So over the course of this presentation, I share with you 8 presuppositions and understandings that I have about relationships, which I think are really important to understand in order for us to have conscious, good, healthy relationships. And then I share 5 very simple tools that you can start using right away. Most of them are tapping related to ensure that the relationships you are having are conscious, deliberate, healthy, and they bring you joy. Now, at the end of this audio, I don't have the entire thing here. I clipped off the end because it wouldn't work very well in a podcast recording. You will hear me send the participants in the audience off to work on a tool. And that's the last tool that I share. When I was giving the presentation, I had the questions that they are reflecting on the PowerPoint presentation and the handouts they had. So I realized as I was editing down the audio, I never said those questions out loud. So for you to get the most out of this, once you get to the end of the presentation and you hear me sending people off to work on the tool set, I'm going to come back and I'm going to share with you those 4 questions so that you can use the tool as well. And I'm going to do it at the end so that you have the context for the tool and you know how to use it. So here is my presentation from the 2018 Spring Energy event. Enjoy. I think it's important that we start with some consistent definitions. Now, the definitions that I'm going to share with you, these are not definitions that you have to agree with my definition. I just want us to be on the same page. So as we progress over the next 40 minutes or so, we're on the same page with the vocabulary, so you understand what I am saying as we navigate through all of this. It also, when we give something vocabulary, it gives us the opportunity to actually have something to work with and change. You know, oftentimes when I'm working with my clients, they show up in an emotional state. And we can do some tapping to bring that emotional state down a little bit. But the real transformation comes when we're able to start giving a framework to the issue and the problem. And sometimes the framework and the issue that the client shows up with isn't even an accurate one, but it becomes the starting place. You know, recently I had a client said, well, everybody at work hates me. And obviously, as a good practitioner, my first question was, really, everyone? But what it did was, because we had some vocabulary, it gave us a place to start talking about the problem because it was framed, and it gave us a chance to challenge and conform and do that. So that's the reason why we're going to use some vocabulary that we use through all of this. So, what do I mean by the term energy and resource management? Every single day when you get up, you have a limited resource that is the energy you have for this day. And every single day when you give up, you have a limited amount of willpower for the day.
And willpower isn't just forcing you to do something, but willpower is that place where you have a novel thought and you make a choice. And it's limited. And so every single time throughout the day, you make a choice, or you make yourself do something that isn't a habit, you burn a little bit of that energy. That's the reason why if you decide to do a new eating plan, breakfast is easy and dinner is hard. Is because throughout the day, every single time you make a choice, you're spending a little of it. It's the reason why Einstein had 8 copies of the exact same outfit, and he wore it every single day. Because what it meant was he didn't have to spend any of that choice energy first thing in the morning, because that decision was already made for him. He just grabbed the one at the front of the cabinet that was clean and he put it on. And not only is it a limited resource, it's not something that is consistent from day to day. When I am sick, I have less energy. When I work out in the morning, I have more energy. If I'm in a strong emotional state, if I've eaten really bad food, all of these things impact our resource state. And so when we are in relationship, our energy and resource state is going to be impacted inside of that relationship. And it's impacted 2 ways. It's impacted in how we show up in the relationship, and it's impacted in how much energy we are spending in that particular moment in the relationship based on who we are across from. And those 2 things intersect. Because there are going to be times where someone shows up in my life and they're complaining about the world and how horrible it is because that's the way they navigate the world and that's the way they think about things, and I can brush it off. And there are other days when I'm in a really diminished resource state and we're having that exact same conversation, and the things that they are saying is just grating on my nerves and I can just feel it sucking the life out of me. And so it's not just the interaction, it's not just the person, but it's also the way that I show up for that that's going to impact the way that that interaction happens and what I am like when I'm done stepping out of it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how all of that fits together and that navigates. So on your worksheet, number 1. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to work our way through 8 presuppositions. And again, these are mine. You don't have to agree with them. That this is going to then be the foundation for the tools that we work on. So our energy and attention is a limited resource. And it's something that can be impacted by the way that we navigate the day. So I think John did a really good job last night of defining what relationship is. I did the bad speaker technique of going to the dictionary and seeing what the definition of relationship is. Merriam-Webster defines relationship as. What's really interesting is the origin of the word relationship comes from from 2 roots. One is for connection, the other is for report. Like when someone was reporting to someone else, which kind of defines the relationship in an interesting way. Relationships that we enter into them because we want something out of them. And I know that can sound really cruel and utilitarian, particularly in a room full of very kind-hearted people, but that's true. You know, and it's not just I'm going into this relationship to take something, but the only way that I can truly be loving is if I have someone to love. The only way I can be giving is if I have someone to give to. And so the relationship itself, even though it is an end in itself, part of that end is what we get from it. And so it's important, at least in this conversation, as we figure out as practitioners and as people in the world, how to healthily navigate the relationships, is to recognize that they're not just this like abstract, fluffy little thing that exists out there. That there's practical considerations of it because we live in the world and we are practical people. And again, that's not a value judgment. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to think about relationships in that way. And I'm not saying it's the only way we think about relationships. But it's helpful as we're trying to do this in a healthy way to keep that in mind. All of the relationships we have terms of engagement that have been negotiated out. Now, most of the terms of engagement that we have in our relationship have been negotiated out implicitly simply because of the lives that we live. Over time, we keep showing up for certain people in the same way over and over again. And so that then becomes the expectation, the definition of the relationship. I had a relationship a number of years ago with someone I love and adore and who's one of the most important people in my life. But I had created a really porous boundary in that relationship. And every single time something went wrong in her life, big or small, she called me to get help for it. And because of how consequential this relationship was to me in my life and my daily life, I had made the decision, if her life is easier, my life is easier, because when her life isn't easy, it complicates my life in a really significant way. But because of that, we had negotiated out the way we interacted in a way that was not healthy in a long-term way. It just kept solving really small problems. And so I had to train myself. It wasn't like we sat down and we got an arbiter and we renegotiated this. But I realized that a renegotiation needed to happen. And so the way that I did it was every single time she called me for something that she needed that I didn't need to solve the problem. Like, do you ever see someone ask questions online? How do I do this thing? There's actually a website called Ask Google. And if you type in something, what it does is it creates a video and it shows them how to Google that particular subject. So you're not answering the question for them. You're renegotiating a relationship. In this particular circumstance, the way I renegotiated the relationship was when she asked for something, and literally some of the time through gritted teeth because I had to force myself to do it, I would say, "That really sucks." And what I was doing is I was affirming the fact that she was going through something hard, but I was also saying, I'm not solving this problem for you. Now, in the times in which it was appropriate for her to ask me, or it was appropriate because I was the best person to help out, I certainly did, but that was 1/3 of the time. And slowly over a period of time, it didn't change the depth of our relationship. It did change the things that she asked from me. Because I explicitly renegotiated that. And so it's important to recognize that every single relationship is that way. That it's something that's negotiated out. And so relationships are a means to an end. And that end might be connection, that end might be love, that end might be functional. Currently you and I are in a relationship, and hopefully the means to that end is you're going to learn something useful from that. And that's not a bad thing. The relationships we have do not exist we do not exist in a vacuum. Every single choice that we make impacts the people around us, and all of the choices of the people around us impact us. And because of the nature of who we are, and I say who we are, the people in this room, because we understand this fact, we have a tendency to respond to this in a disproportionate way. Because we are good, thoughtful, caring people who understand the emotional lives of ourselves and other people, we have a more heightened awareness of the way that our choices impact others. And because of that, oftentimes we put others first. Because we are good-hearted and kind and we think in those ways. Our actions impact others, and we overcompensate for this because we understand this. Anytime I'm working with, and it's really, when I am working with a client who is struggling with a relationship, because they've come to me to work on the relationship, they're obviously the one who is very thoughtful about the nature of the relationship because they've come and sought help. And so because of that, almost always they are the one who is being run over in the relationship. And they're not coming to me because they've been run over in the relationship. They're coming to me because they're really thoughtful and they want to change, and their thoughtfulness has put them in a position where they consistently put themselves second. And so as we're trying to navigate healthy relationships, to have the energy that we need to be the people we are in the world, it's important for us to recognize that. And the instant you start wanting to change that, I know that there are some of you who are just feeling a pain in your side as you think about that. The relationships we have are not equal. We would like to assume that they are equal, but they're not. The only way that we can have a purely symmetric relationship is if we are having a relationship with ourselves. because then the person on the other side of that relationship is exactly the same. And that's okay. That's not a value judgment. I am the sounding board for my sister a lot. And we'll work through something, and she's going through a lot of transition right now as she's moving and changing jobs and stuff like that. And at the end of it, she's like, I feel so bad that I'm always taking from this relationship. I want to be doing stuff for you. And that's not that she is getting a disproportionate amount of take from there. It's because of the place we are in our lives and the skill set we have and the way that that works out. That's okay. So it's okay that the relationships are that way, but it's important that we're doing that in a really conscious way, and we are aware of that fact. And the equality can be in the amount of attention, the amount of energy, the amount of who takes the lead, a lot of different things. But there is that to the relationships. And again, it's important as we're kind of navigating this stuff, and we'll get into the places that we struggle, that when we assume that there is a symmetry to a relationship and there is not, it's really easy for us to feel a sense of resentment and overwhelm and not being cared for and giving too much. And that's not to say that we're not allowed to ask for different things in relationships, but if we're just simply assuming it's equal, it can lead us to a place where we're going to emotionally struggle. So, all relationships are asymmetric. Relationships are really interesting because they have this kind of static snapshot to them. Whenever I go home to Wyoming, to the house that I grew up in, which it looks different because it's been renovated a number of times, but it's basically the same space. My brother, my sister, and I turn back into 15, 13, and 9. Like we just all immediately fall back into those roles and we become those people. Regardless how much we've evolved, regardless how much our relationships individually outside of that concept evolves, when we get back into the place, we fall into those places. And that's because there's this expectation and there's this navigation. It's a habit in the way we interact with each other. And because of that, when we decide to transform, when we decide to change consciously, unconsciously, when that happens, it means the terms of the relationship change as well, and that isn't something that is necessarily always appreciated by the person on the other side. The people in our lives want us to change as long as they don't have to. Now, this is not an absolute. There are people in our lives who recognize the fact that we are evolving and we are changing, and they're happy to join us on that journey. But anytime we have a relationship that has been implicitly negotiated, and anytime our transformation is certainly not at the forefront of the relationship, there can be this huge amount of resistance from the other side as we go through that transformation. And it's not because they don't want us to change, it's because they don't want their life to change. And so it's important for us to recognize, again, this isn't a value judgment about the people in our lives who resist our change. It's more of a recognition that that's what happens. Every single time the operating system on your phone changes, you just piss and moan for 3 days because you can't find anything and nothing works. Because you have this expectation habitually of how things change. So much so I have the new fancy iPhone. And I had it for 3 days, and there's no button on it, and there's this face recognition. It just operates in a different way. And I had figured it out, and a friend of mine handed me his very new iPhone, but wasn't the newest iPhone. I literally had no idea how to use it anymore because I'd forgotten it. That's how habitual our response is to the way the world around us works. It is our genetic disposition to create habits because it takes less energy to do something that is habitual. And so, to recognize the fact that that's just a reality of our transformation, that resistance is going to show up. And again, as we manage healthy relationships, it's a good thing for us to keep in mind. So there's this really interesting thing about when we're navigating relationships and the word should. I did an interview a number of years ago for the podcast around this idea of should. And we had this really interesting conversation about shoulds and shoulders. And anytime I have a client who shows up with a lot of tension in their shoulders, the first thing I start doing is I start navigating to this idea of should. What are the things you feel like you should be doing right now? And in relationships off of should, and we assume that we should be doing something. And we oftentimes mistake responsibility and shoulds for choice. And in reality, it is a choice in the way that we navigate this stuff. For me, and it becomes really easy for us to start resenting the things that we feel like we should be doing, like the should has been placed upon us, or it's really easy for us to resent the other person because they are not doing and living up to the relationship in the way we think the relationship should be. For me, one of the things that I do whenever I'm navigating I use the word should, is I force myself to add at the end of that statement, and I consciously choose this as my reality. So I'm immediately pushing back against this idea I should be doing something. Because all of it is a choice. Now, sometimes when we choose away from something, there are really nasty, horrible consequences to that. But it's still a choice that we are making to do. You know, I made the choice to pay my federal income tax this year. That was a choice I made. You know, because I recognized if I didn't, the consequences for that would be pretty nasty and not something that I want to deal with. The IRS is nothing if not persistent. But again, it's this idea of choice. And so as we are navigating our relationships, it's really easy for us to mistake choice for responsibility. So as you are looking at your relationships, and when we talk about the tool set, we're going to lean into this idea specifically. To recognize that anytime you feel like you should be doing something because I am a good son, because it is my father, because this is what my family does, to give you an opportunity to really evaluate that and recognize it is a choice that you have abdicated into a way to say it's something you should be doing. Because of the room I'm standing in, I know this happens a lot, where you are at the grocery store and the person who is bagging the groceries just all of a sudden out of the blue starts talking about their cancer diagnosis, their dead dog, or their fight with their mom. And that is something that is unique for my empathic friends who are in this room. I don't have to worry about that. I don't have a heart. It's not the world I live in. But for those of you in the room who do live in that way, it's a really unique experience. And what happens is, on a subconscious level, because of your very specific giftedness, you are very aware of the emotional state of the people around you. And the people around you recognize that on a subconscious level. And all of a sudden go, I'm standing in front of someone who understands me and therefore it is safe. And particularly when they're in a moment of stress, they're looking for a safe harbor. And so you are the fortunate benefit of that interaction. And so I think this is a really important idea. Empath giftedness is often used by others disguised as relationship. And this is a place for those of you who are super empathic can land in a place of really strong resentment because you can make the same mistake of assuming it is a relationship that is really asymmetric and disproportionate. And again, this is not being done by conscious malice of someone going and sucking this resource away from you. We don't teach babies to suck their thumb. They suck their thumb because it feels good and it's self-soothing. So for me, my giftedness is I am a giant lightning rod for empaths. Basically what I do is I detox empaths. And it's not a choice, and it's like, I don't know what's happening, but literally all of that crap that you all have picked up, I just clean out. Because of that, I have lots and lots of empaths in my life. Not because of my charm, not because of my winning smile. They just sit down next to me and go, oh my gosh, this is safe. And they just feel all the junk being sucked out of them. And so I say that just again to help you to navigate the world. And we're going to talk about some tools to be able to navigate this in a healthy way. But again, as we're thinking about relationships and the way we spend energy in relationships, when we're dealing with that empathic sense, it's really important to recognize it's a relationship, but it's a radically different type of relationship than someone who is my friend. And you can be friends with people who you help in that way as well, but it's just a lens that I think is really useful as we navigate all of this. And for some of you, giving yourself permission to understand that is the reason why you showed up this weekend. Like just getting that one thing seared in your brain, that's going to be something that's going to be useful. Because of who we are and the work that we do, we more clearly understand how relationships work. Okay, so no, we don't. What we do is, because of who we are more willing to ask difficult questions and try and understand what is going on. But just because we have the emotional intelligence to answer the questions does not mean we have the emotional intelligence to navigate the difficult answers that come from that. Just because we are better at this does not mean we are good at this. And that's, again, not a value judgment, but I think it's something that's really important for us to recognize as we're trying to do this in a healthy way, that it's really easy for us to think, because we have this tool set, we think about professional development, all of this stuff, that this is something that we can navigate on our own. My favorite question when I'm having a conversation with a possible client, my favorite question that a possible client asks me is, so do you work with a practitioner and what does that look like? Because they want to be working with someone who's also doing their own work as well. You know, I've been doing this stuff for over a decade, and Dr. Bob and I spent a great deal of time on the phone navigating my crap as well. So let's talk about tools. That's the other side of the page there. Okay, so the first tool, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it just because I don't have the time here. If you go to tappingqa.com, about to as if, that little URL there, there's a 20-minute audio that explains the process. Basically, when I'm talking about relationships, this is the first tool I teach anybody. It's basically you tap where you talk about the relationship, you tap where you pretend you're talking to the person, and you tap as if you are the other person in the relationship. I taught my sister this years and years ago, and she was having trouble with a coworker. And I was in Portland, and we spent 45 minutes tapping on this little protocol. Monday morning, 10 a.m., coworker stands up in the middle of this little cube farm, violently announces her resignation, slams everything into a box, takes her resignation letter, slam tapes it to the door, and storms out. Now, it would be very easy to think, oh my gosh, my sister just tapped her out of the office. Oh, if it were that easy. My belief, my understanding of that instead was, there was a conflict that was showing up in this relationship, and my sister got emotionally clear. And when my sister got emotionally clear, she had changed the terms of the relationship because she was showing up as a different person. The person she was in relationship went from, I am frustrated with my coworker, to, I am in the wrong spot. And because my sister was able to redefine the way that she showed up, the person she was in the relationship was able to redefine her understanding of the circumstance, which gave her the opportunity to make a different choice. And maybe the only way she could have quit was to done it in a violent way, because she might not have been able to go through appropriate channels and whatever and go with God if that's the way you need to do it. But again, it's this understanding that there are both sides to this, and one side changes, the other side changes as well. So it's a useful tool to navigate your way through. Okay. Energy hygiene. So, again, particularly for those of you who are on the more empathic end of the spectrum, because relationships are so dynamic, and because we often show up in our most vulnerable ways when we connect with another human, and again, John D. talked elegantly last night about how we are made for this. Like it is our disposition. It is how we are healthy, is to do this. Is to know that because we are spending energy when we're doing it, as much as I want to be present now, I also have something I have to be present to in 15 minutes, in 2 days, in my lifetime. And if I show up in such a way that I'm being emotionally drained all of the time, that I end up with 8,000 tumors on my adrenal glands, that's an unhealthful way for me to be in this relationship. Like these are things that need to be navigated. So the first tool that I use is I use this mesh ball of golden light. And all of those things are by design. So and I'm sure many of you do practice like this as well, where I just start with a little ball and it just kind of grows to the size that it needs to be around me. And I imagine it's mesh. It's not a shield. It's not a wall. It's a filter. And because it's mesh, I have the opportunity to open and close the size of the holes, allowing how much to go through. And because it's a ball, I can make it bigger and smaller. In this room right now, my golden ball can be the size of this room, and that's perfectly safe for me. And when I get back to New York City and I get off in Penn Station and I get on the C train to start heading home, it's going to be about this big. Okay? The second part of that that's really important for me is you'll see that it says helpful and healthful. So my intention when I make this golden ball of light is only allow in the information that is helpful and healthful for me to hear. When I am on the subway and I cannot interact with the people around me because we don't talk to each other on the subway in New York City, it is unhelpful for me to know the suffering of the person next to me in depth. It's okay for me to know that someone is in distress and maybe surrogate tap for them, be present to them, smile at them. But it is unhelpful for me to know the depth of the pain they are feeling in that moment. Like it does me no good other than harm in that moment. So it's not helpful. Healthful. There are times in which I want to be fully present to the person in front of me, and I am so resource depleted at that particular moment, it is not healthy for me to understand the emotional strife that you are going through. Because I am so depleted and wounded in that moment, if I am also engaging with what you are dealing with at this moment as well, it's going to be bad for both of us. Because I'm going to be unhelpful to you, and I'm going to be in a worse state from that. So that's always the intention for me when I am present to someone. Allow me to, just the intention I have before I have client sessions is just allow me to have access to the information that is helpful and healthful for me in this moment. And when I'm showing up in a helping context, I'm going to get enough information for me to be helpful in that moment without having to understand everything because I trust the process enough. Because there are lots of times in which I am working with someone and I'm working with them on this level or what I think is this level because of the information I'm giving. And at the end of the session, they start telling, oh my gosh, these are the things we hit way down here. And I didn't realize the connection that was happening all the way to that base issue, but I didn't have to. I just needed to have enough information to be present inside of that as we navigated that and to trust it. For me, in the work that I do, it is supremely important that I am sympathetic to my clients. It is really unuseful for me to be empathetic with my clients. I'm in the middle of a session, and my client says, well, this probably has nothing to do with it. But when I was 9, for about 18 months, I was a prisoner of war. Now, for me to be empathetic, to feel what they are feeling, I'm going to be a crap practitioner in that moment because I'm going to be overwhelmed by that. So to be able to sympathize allows me to be in my faculties and present to that. When I'm having a conversation with a friend that I love and they're navigating something that's difficult, being empathetic to that is the perfect thing to do as a friend, as a brother, as a son, as whatever those things are. And so it's important that we're navigating, we're conscious about the way that we show up and are present so that we can be the best for that person and we can be healthy as we exit that. Disconnect. When I finish a client session, when I finish phone calls with friends, I think of the old switchboard and I literally reach up right here and I unplug myself from what I've just done. And when I first had this idea introduced to me, the person said, I take this sword and I sever the golden light between us. And that's very dramatic and a little violent. I like the idea of this disconnection because it implies that I'm going to be able to reconnect the next time we're present to each other. So I am fully present to you right now, and I'm going to disconnect this so I can be present to what's there, but I haven't forgotten about you, and at any point I can reconnect with the operator and we can connect again. And so it becomes this really intentional thing for me, so I'm not spreading myself thin over multiple conversations, personally or professionally. Again, it's just this idea of being really thoughtful about my energy. Collect before you leave. Every single time I leave a room, before I leave a room, I imagine that I am a magnet. And any of the energy that I have spread in this room, I just go, and I take it with me. So I am not spread over multiple locations. I think it's one of the reasons why when we travel great distances, it's so exhausting, is because oftentimes energy are stretched over multiple time zones, and that's exhausting. And so by being really intentional every single time I leave a room, I'm just taking all of me with me, so I'm not spread across multiple locations. And again, it's not saying I'm forgetting or dismissing the thing that I'm leaving behind, but I'm doing it in this really intentional way. Clean up after. Positive ions. Welcome to the science portion of our presentation. So in a molecule, as you will all remember from 7th grade, there are neutrons and protons in the center of the atom, and there are electrons that spin around it. And when a molecule is balanced, the number of protons and the number of electrons equal each other, so that we have an equal positive and negative. But that's not how things actually exist in the world. There are times in which things have more protons than electrons, or more electrons than protons, and then we call them an ion. So a positively charged ion means it has more protons than electrons, and a negatively charged means it has more electrons than protons. And when it's imbalanced, it seeks to move its way back to balance. So the energy that we absorb is energy which is electrons. So that would mean anytime we can get ourselves around positive ions, what those positive ions are going to do is they're going to suck up those little electrons. This is the reason why you love standing next to crashing waves or the bottom of a waterfall. Water molecules hold their electrons really loosely. And so when water crashes, it creates all of these positively charged water molecules that are looking for electrons. And just imagine them like and coming and just sucking all of that stuff off of you. I was doing some research on this, and I need to do a deeper dive on this. But one of the studies I saw said that per cubic centimeter at the base of a waterfall, there are 100,000 positively charged, positive ions of water molecules. Salt water. So when salt melts, the calcium and the sodium, the chloride and the sodium break apart. Like that's what's happening when it's diluting. And when they do that, the sodium becomes a positively charged ion. And this is any salt. It doesn't have to be Himalayan salt. It doesn't have to be salt that was drudged off the bottom of the Dead Sea. It doesn't have to come from the planet Mars. It doesn't have to be prayed over by some monk. Like, this is just basic science. Morton salt off the counter works. When I worked in the county jail, within the first 30 minutes of walking out the door, I took a salt bath because there was some energetic grossness in that county jail. Like, that's just the reality of that space. But it becomes a really useful thing in helping us to be energetically safe as we do this. I have a mister bottle, where you'd spray water when you're ironing, full of salt water. And I just go through my space after sessions and just spray the air. And again, just taking all of this energy and just gathering it up. Oftentimes the room feels lighter, like literally brighter after that. And it has nothing to do with what's in the room. What's happening is because that energy is being sucked up, you relax. And the smallest muscles in your body are the muscles that dilate your eyes. And when that energy goes away and you relax, all of a sudden your eyes are relaxed and you can focus better, and it actually lets in the proper light. It's the exact same reason why after you do a tapping session, sometimes colors look more vibrant. It's because your eyes have relaxed enough that you're actually seeing the room in a slightly different way, and you're seeing it for what it is. So it's just another way of keeping yourself safe. In relationship, state your needs clearly. This is really hard, but it's really important for us to do. And I won't go much beyond that. I do not want you to take away from this that your only choice is to make healthy choices in every relationship you have. That there are going to be times where you are completely stretched thin and you're still going to take that call from that loved one and you're going to be a sounding board. Or you're going to stay up way too late on a Sunday night talking to a friend, even though you know Monday morning it's going to be hard. Make sure for me, it's important to be making those choices consciously. Like it is okay to run yourself dry. It is okay to spend more resource than you have. It is okay to be in a circumstance where it is too much for you. But it's really important for me that is a conscious choice. Where I know this is going to be hard, that's okay. I'm going to pay for this tomorrow morning in my meeting, that's okay. Because being present right now is more valuable than that. And I'm consciously choosing that and I'm recognizing the consequences. Does that make sense? Okay, last thing. So you will see the 4 questions here. And we're going to take 5 minutes. I want you to try this. So I have found, for me, when I'm navigating things and I'm trying to understand stuff, I have found that there's the practical description of it and there is the emotional response from it. So when I'm doing a process like this and I ask the first question, what do you get from the relationship? So for this, we're going to think about a specific relationship, okay? And so then what I want you to do is you list, what do you get from that relationship? And then after you've listed what you get from the relationship, what I want you to do is I want you to write the emotional response from that relationship. And what you get from the relationship can be positive things and it can be negative things. You know, one of the things you might get from a relationship is a headache. That happens sometimes. A drain, a worry, whatever it is. And so then it gives you the opportunity. So you list what that thing is, and then you list what the emotional response is. And so you work your way through these questions, and you can see that the questions are really simple. Basically what we're doing is we're looking at positive and we're looking at the struggle, and we're looking at it from our point of view and we're looking at it from their point of view. And it gives us the ability to flesh that out. Conceptually, does that make sense? Okay, so what I want you to do with a person who is sitting next to you, just for a few moments, I want you to kind of work through these questions with a relationship. Now, a couple of things as we do this. One is you do not have to reveal who the relationship is with your partner or any details. Like, this is a safe space, and I also want you to feel comfortable. Don't feel like you have to share anything that is uncomfortable for you. But what I want you to do is, and we're going to do a very short period of time so we can stay on schedule. What I want you to do is I want you to, one person for about 2.5 minutes, the other person for 2.5 minutes, just work through the questions so you can see what it's like to kind of draw these things out and see what the emotion is there. And the reason I want you doing it with someone else is because you're going to hear them process a relationship in a way that you might not, which is going to give you insight so you can do the tool set a little better. Make sense?
So the way that you use this last step, which I just talked about in the presentation, is you have 4 questions. And what you're going to do is you're going to answer each of the 4 questions. And like I said, you're going to write down your emotional response to your answers. So when I am doing this process, for each one of the answers I give, because as you'll see in a moment, there are multiple answers to the question, I actually skip a couple of lines because with each of the answers, it is possible to have multiple emotional responses to that answer. And this gives you the opportunity to capture all of those emotional responses. So once you've filled the little questionnaire out, you now have a bunch of instances and the emotions that you're feeling, and it's going to give you a great place to enter into and tap. So the 4 questions are, what do I get from the relationship? Number 2, what do they get from the relationship? Number 3, what aren't I getting from the relationship that I would like to be receiving? And number 4, what are they getting from the relationship that feels like it is unfair that they are taking? So by working your way with each of these questions, it's going to give you an opportunity to look at the things that you expect and the things that are detriments from the relationship, and it gives you a chance to look at the emotional response to each of them, which will give you a great place to tap and to dive right in. If you have any questions about that process, let me know. I can be reached always, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. And I would really love to hear your feedback on not just that tool, but all of the presuppositions and how I talk about and define relationships to see if that is useful for you and what you disagree with. Because I'm always loving to be in a circumstance where I get a chance to evolve and transform the way I think about these different issues, and your experience and your expertise is going to help me to do that. Again, we would love to see you at the Spring Energy event next year. All you need to do is go to springenergyevent.com, sign up for the mailing list there on the right-hand side. Like I said, you will get recordings from previous years, as well as all the information for next year. It's such a wonderful community, and it's a great experience. I would love, love, love it if you were able to join us. If you have any questions or comments about anything we cover on the podcast, please let me know. Click on that contact link on the website or inside of the app. Email me directly, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. You can find the podcast in Apple Podcasts, Google Music Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify. Anywhere there's a podcast, you should be able to download it. Please, 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 if you know someone in your life who could really use the information that we talked about today, please pass it along. Don't spam your inbox and send it to everybody in the world. But if you know someone who this would make a difference for, please pass it along. It would mean the world to me. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Monterastelli, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Monterastelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Monterastelli or Tapping Q&A.